Welcome back to Snowy Owl Knits. I am going to do a little bit of a tutorial today on two-color brioche in the round, and the goal is to be able to make a headband or a cowl and have it be as stretchy as the brioche on both the cast on and the bind off edge. So let's talk a little bit about brioche first. It's characterized by contrasting ribs of color which alternate on the front side, which is in this blue, and on the back side in the white. And it's created by doing a series of yarn overs and brioche knits or brioche purls. And so if you look closely here, you'll see that behind each knit row of the main color, we have in between what looks sort of like a herringbone pattern, but what is happening here is on either side of each knit stitch is a shawl in the contrasting color. And there's also a shawl in the main color as well because of the way it's knit. And the really great thing about brioche knitting in the round is when you're working your main color, you'll always brioche knit when you're working that round, and you'll purl in your contrast. And when it comes to working that contrast color, every time you pick up that white, you'll be brioche purling. There's just a couple of setup steps that you need to take, and so let's get into that. So I chose as my main color this Cascade 220 Superwash in a lime green. And I used the German Longtail Twisted Cast On because it's really stretchy, and we want this cast on edge to be as stretchy as we can get it. So I did that very loosely, even number of stitches, and then I loosely knit one round. I placed my marker, and to begin, I pull out a length of yarn here. This is the setup round. So all the way around, we're going to begin with pulling the yarn forward and slipping that first stitch purlwise and carrying that yarn over with us. So we've created kind of a double stitch, and then we just knit the next stitch. Then we bring the yarn forward, slip that stitch, and hold on to that yarn over and knit the next stitch. Yarn forward, slip that stitch as if you were purling, and carry that yarn over with it, followed by a knit stitch, and then yarn forward, slip that stitch purlwise, carrying the yarn over with it, knit, yarn forward, slip that stitch purlwise, carrying the yarn over with it, knit, yarn forward, slip the stitch purlwise, carrying your yarn over with it, and we'll continue in this way all the way around until we get back to the marker, and we will then be ready to start brioche color. We're going to add in our next color, and I'll show you how to carry your yarns, where to leave the yarn, so that you don't end up with a mess on your needles. Okay, I'm coming up to my place marker. I've been doing a combination of the yarn overs and the knits. Just a few more here. Knit. Slip and carry and knit. Okay, so we've completed our setup round, and let me slip my marker over here. Once you've done that round, you can go ahead and just leave your main color in the back, because you'll be working with your main color in brioche knit, so you'll need it in the back. We're now going to add another color in, but I want you to have a look at what we have on our needles so far. We have kind of this double stitch. Okay, this is where we did the yarn over, followed by a knit. A yarn over and slip, followed by a knit. So these stitches that have these yarn overs are like a little couple. They're engaged, okay? And our job is to marry them. And we're going to marry them with our next color. But this guy's alone, so we need to give him a partner or a yarn over. And when we're working with the second color, we're going to be brioche purling, or the abbreviation for that is BRP, or burping. And so we're going to bring in our contrast color, which is also the Cascade 220 in a white. And although I want my working yarn to be in the front, I don't want my tail in the front. So I'm holding it along with my right needle just for this first stitch, because it helps me to work the first stitch. So here's our little pair of stitches, okay? And our job is to marry them off by brioche purling or burping. Now this next guy is by himself. He needs a partner. So just like before, we keep our yarn in front and we slip that stitch and carry that yarn over with it. And hold on to it so you can bring your yarn back to the front to brioche purl. Here's our pair of stitches. So we're going to marry them off and keep our yarn in front, because here's this little lonely guy who needs his yarn over. So we carry that yarn over and bring our yarn back to the front, because now we have another pair, and we brioche purl that pair just like it was one stitch, and then we provide this next single stitch with its yarn over by going into it as if we're purling, holding that yarn over in place. And as we expect, we have a pair that we brioche purl together. Yarn in front, single stitch, so we slip purlwise and carry the yarn over with it. Yarn back to the front, brioche purl that pair together. Single stitch, needs a yarn over, so we slip purlwise, carrying the yarn over, yarn back to the front to brioche purl. Let's do a few more. Single stitch, needs a yarn over, so we slip purlwise and carry that yarn over, yarn back to the front. Let's marry this pair off. Another single stitch, as we would expect, because we go from single stitches to double and single and double. So we're going to give this guy his yarn over by slipping purlwise, carrying the yarn over, yarn to the front, to brioche purl. And so we'll continue in this way until we get back to the marker. And I'll give you some tips on continuing in a way that avoids some common problems. And I will tell you this, when you begin the brioche, it doesn't look correct for just a few rounds. I remember when I learned how to do this that I thought I was making mistakes, and it's just that the pattern had not really shown up yet. I felt like, you know, everything was a mess. Like, let's have a look at it now. You can see we have, it does look like a mess at this point. We have what looks like some purl bumps in between, and we have these two colored, you know, yarn overs, like these double stitches. It's very hard to see right now what it will look like when it's done. But have patience with it, have some faith in the process, and as long as you're just marrying off a pair or providing some lonely guy with his yarn over, and you're doing the stitch required, whether it's a brioche purl or a brioche knit, it all works out just fine. So I'll see you when we get to the marker. Okay, I'm coming up to my marker. I've got a brioche purl, and I have this lonely guy at the end right before my marker. And so one thing to remember to do here in this place is give this guy his yarn over. Make sure you carry it with him. Bring your yarn back to the front, because every time you work with the brioche with your contrast color, you will be purling. So we just want to leave it laying in the front. We're going back to the green, which is our main color, and he's in the right, this is in the right place. We have the yarn coming from the back, because with this color, we'll be doing either the slipping and yarn over, or we will be brioche purling. So let's look here. Let me slip my marker. I've got the tail of the white hanging out of the back, which is good. And of course, I've got my green tail sort of down here at the bottom. My contrast color, which will be worked with purling, is in the front. So let me make sure I grab my main color here. And let's look at what we have on the needles. We have Lonely Guy here, so he's going to need a yarn over. And then we have this little pair, and you notice that it's in two colors now because we've added in the contrast color. When you brioche knit this pair, that white will go into the background, and this is where you start seeing the row of the green. And in between where it's purled, this is where we're starting to get the herringbone pattern, or the shawls on each side. So let's go ahead and get going on this. Okay, so our single stitch needs a yarn over, and we carry it like that. And I'm tightening up my tail just a wee bit. It bothers me to have it loose. And now we have a pair of stitches. We need to treat those as one stitch, and we're going to brioche knit, or BRK, or bark that stitch. Okay, and then this single guy here needs his yarn over, so slip purlwise and carry the yarn over. Brioche knit this pair as if it were just one stitch, and then yarn to the front so we can slip purlwise, carry the yarn over, give that lonely stitch its yarn over. Brioche knit. I will say a common mistake often is not picking up both strands, or sometimes one won't want to come off of the needle quite right. So here's our single stitch, and we need a yarn over, so we're slipping purlwise, carrying the yarn over. So what I mean by that is you might go into a stitch and somehow not pull both off. One will remain on your needle, and when you come back around, you'll think, oh Lord, what have I done? And it's possible to fix mistakes with brioche. It just takes a little bit of practice. Another thing I like to do when I'm brioche knitting, and it's harder on this first round, is to frequently look at my work on both the front and on the back side. At this point, as I said, it's difficult to see the actual chain of solid stitches, but you are able to see a pattern. You can see a yarn over where there are two colors, a single color, a yarn over, a single color, a yarn over, and a single, and so on and so forth. At this point, you can be looking for that. And just remember, if a stitch is by itself, it needs a yarn over. When you have this pair of stitches, you join them with the brioche knit or the brioche purl. And we just continue on around. I think it takes about 4 rounds before you actually see the pattern that you're looking for. So again, be patient with yourself and just continue when you're using your main color to brioche knit and to give single stitches their yarn overs. And when you're using your contrast color or the white, that's when you're brioche purling. But really this slipping one, catching the yarn over is the same on each round. So I'm going to work up a couple of rows and let you practice with this. And by the way, these small projects, you know, something where there's not several hundred stitches, these are a great way to learn two-color brioche because you're not investing in a ton of yarn, and it's smaller. You get to see progress more quickly. If you do make a terrible mistake that you can't fix, you haven't invested hundreds of hours in it. And so I highly recommend something small like this headband I'm doing. And by the way, let me point out, this is a 16-inch circumference needle. This is, when it's done, this will be big enough to fit the average adult head. This stretches so much that the 16 inches really works out well. I'll have a pattern for you to look at. Also, if you were not familiar with the German long-tailed cast-on, there's a link in the description box below. I almost purled that stitch. That's another mistake that's commonly made, is instead of just slipping and carrying the yarn over, if you're not thinking, or if you're doing like I am and you're talking, then you might purl it and you'll end up, with something that you don't want. All right, so keep on working on providing yarn overs or knitting together. We'll do a couple of rounds and see how it's looking. So I'm on round 4 here of the brioche, and I thought I'd point out that we're starting to see clean, unbroken lines of the main color, the green, and on the back side you're beginning to see the unbroken lines of the white. And I'm just continuing with the brioche knit, followed by the slip one yarn over with my main color, my green, and that's really all there is to it. Although, look, I'll point out to you, this is something that happens a lot with brioche knitting. It looks here like I've got 3 stitches together, but in fact, if I turn it over like this, see, I've just done a knit, like the brioche knit, and my next plan would be to give a yarn over to somebody single. Well, this yarn over has folded over the top. That's something that you'll quite often find when doing the brioche. So pay attention to what you're expecting next, and if it doesn't look right, just think through it, and you'll find that you're able to solve most problems before they occur. And as I said earlier, I like to look at my work as I'm going, so that if I've made a mistake here, it's much easier for me to kind of unknit back to that point rather than having to ladder down on another round. It's a little more difficult with brioche to ladder down, but there are some really good videos out there. I think Kingfisher does one that was really helpful. So I'm using 2 highly contrasting colors, and some people like to use a variegated yarn, one with color changes. Oh, I've got yarn coming all over the place. They for instead of using like a white behind this, they'll use a yarn with lots of color changes, and so you get this vivid top color with sort of a marled background that has different color changes. It's worth it to do whatever colors float your boat, really, because gosh, there's so many variations on a theme. I do find it hard to work with black yarn sometimes in doing brioche, because it's much harder to see stitch definition when you're working with very, very dark colors. But it's not impossible, it's just a matter of your preference. And so really that's all there is to color brioche. Your pattern will tell you how many stitches to cast on. What I'm making here is a headband for a little girl down the street. I cast on 50 stitches for this project, and with 60 stitches it would be big enough for my head. In fact, this will stretch to my head too, but I don't want it too awfully tight. And I'll finish this off when I've reached about 2 inches. I'll bind off with a modified version of Jenny's super stretchy bind off. And with that bind off, you add a yarn over, a backward yarn over between stitches and cast off 2 over the first one. But for demonstration purposes, I've got you this far. Now it's time for me to move on to my white, do another inch or so, and I'll finish by knitting 1 round, plain knitting with my main color before I bind off, because my cast on was followed by a plain knitting round, and that gives me that little bit of a border on each side. So happy knitting to you, happy brioche, enjoy, keep practicing with it. It's a beautiful stitch pattern, and it has great possibilities for many things, including sweaters. But practice with something smaller first, and you'll get the hang of it in no time. Thanks for joining me again at Snowy Owl Knits, and I'll see you next time.